Hello all, and welcome to another edition of the Low Code Cafe, episode number 117 for November 9, 2022. This episode is entitled The Distance from Here to There, where we're going to talk about some low code techniques and some SQL magic that's going to help find the distance between some points and put that into use. But before we get into that, let me introduce myself. My name is Dale Warner. I'm head of support for Plainton App. I'm joined on the webinar today by Patrick Anderson, who's a technical success manager for Plainton App. This is an event we hold every Wednesday this hour. It's a weekly meeting that we hold for our community that typically demos our hands-on, we'll do hands-on coding to demonstrate techniques, but also talk some about our product and some tips and stories and tips from our team. You are invited to be our guest speaker if you have an application or or content that would be of interest to the community in general. Please reach out to us and let us know. We'll set it up. These episodes are recorded. We have 116 hours of very good training content available at youtube.com/PlantonApp. So we invite you to go to that address using the QR code or any of the content that we send you, subscribe, set up alerts so that you can know just as soon as we post them to our channel. Today, you'll be hearing mostly from me. We'll talk about a few things in our From the Trenches segment and then get right on into dealing with the topic at hand, the distance between 2 points. You can engage with us in a number of ways. So you can type in the chat window or the question and answer. If you want to talk, you can raise your hand. And then after the event, there is a feedback form. You're welcome to, you'll see the link in that in what I'm going to send here in a minute. So you're welcome to interact with us that way. I have a little bit of information about our product, which is to say that the version release 1.23 is released. The beta is complete and it was released, I think, yesterday. We are actively working on the release notes, and that's an email that you'll get in the next day or two. But it covers these things that we've been talking about. I think we went into detail about them 2 weeks ago. But version control, improving our administrative UIs, improving our documentation, those are the major areas that we're at work. From the trenches of support, we have a few things to talk about. As many of you on this webinar are aware, there's a requirement in our version 122 upgrade where the SQL user defined in the platform must be configured as the DB owner, and you can test that using SQL console. I have it here on the screen, but I'm going to actually put it in the chat as well so we can take a look at that. Because we got it as a particular question from the community, I wanted to make sure that it was available. So we'll put that on the chat. And really, I'll show you right now what that looks like. If we go to, for example, our SQL console and paste that SQL query, this is going to test to see whether or not the SQL user is the DB owner. When you run it, it should come back with a value of 1. If it does, then you should be safe to upgrade. And if it comes back as a 0, it means you're not the DB owner and you will have problems with the upgrade to version 1.22. And so we recommend, if that's the case, that you reach out to support. We can help you with that. The solution is that you have to have access to SQL Server Management Studio and give that user DB owner rights to the database. For those of you who are using applications on our infrastructure, this is the way that you should. So hosted, you should be set up this way already. But if you're using your own infrastructure and you're using on-premise, then this is something that you'll have to do, and you should have access to be able to do it. Some our new version, 1.23, there's some notes that are important. The first is that you have to have some of our hotfixes, but specifically the app builder hotfix 1.22.41, or that number higher than 41, for the version 1.23 to appear in your update screen. So if you're at version 1.22 and you're not seeing version 1.23, this is the reason. You have to install some hotfixes. This is the particular one that you need to be able to see that. Our legacy UI, which is an option in updates to see the updates from older legacy user interface, you'll still be able to see that and upgrade. So that's your other choice, using the legacy UI. But we recommend that you go with installing the hotfix. There are 3 hotfixes being released this week to make some changes to 1.22, but the same hotfixes are being released in 1.23. And these are pretty much cosmetic, not entirely. The first one, tokens that the free geo IP token wasn't working, and it's now fixed. And actually, that one's pretty easy to illustrate, so I'm going to do that. The other 2 things that we had a cosmetic issue where when you were deleting a role, it appeared wrong on the screen, but it was actually doing the right thing. So that's a very minor thing. And then in the same way, when you're looking at entities, whether or not the entity was being displayed in the menu was not showing the right indicator. So that would be this display in menu wasn't showing correctly, and we've fixed that now with this update. So a couple of minor things, and then in tokens, the free geo IP is a useful one. So if you look in tokens and you look up the free, we can see free geo IP, and it gives you back things based on the IP address of the user, things like country code and country name, region, whatever. And so I've built up a nice long token that displays all of those. And if you run it, you'll get information relative to where you are. So you have US and United States, I'm in Texas, the city, the zip code, the time zone, a latitude and longitude. And I'll just caution you, this is the latitude and longitude for the city. It's not device level. So it's going to get you close within a few miles, but it's not precision. But that can be useful information if you want to make a context sensitive. Okay, this is information that I'm showing in the United States versus information that I'm showing in Mexico. You can use these tokens to customize what you see or how it acts. So useful token, wasn't working, and now we've got it fixed. So that is our hot fixes for this week. Beyond that, I would encourage you to engage in Campfire. That's an event that we hold on Fridays, the same hour, but instead of it being a webinar, it's a meeting format, so you can interact between each other and with us. It's we see a lot of low-code questions answered, both from us, from the community. It's a really great group to be part of. I encourage you to join that, and that the ability to get to that is in the links that I'm about to post to you. These links for this episode I'm going to put on the chat. Today we're going to be, in addition to being able to register in advance for Low Code Campfire, you can get to our YouTube channel, access to our community portal, which is a great place to ask and help other people answer questions, our webinar feedback form that I referred to a little while ago. Then we have some links related particularly to this episode, which is we're going to be building today on the work that we did in episode 114 just a few weeks ago, where we worked with the National Address Database. So if you want to see how that database came into existence on our test system, you can watch that video. The National Address Database is a US-based thing that I stumbled upon or went looking for and found. And so it's a really great database, and it's at that URL. And then the work that we're doing today is actually being, I'm doing it within the low code Campfire website, which is for the people who participate in low code Campfire, you can gain access to this. So there's a lot of good shared techniques. And so figured I would do that there so that anybody that happened to need to use this technique, it would be very accessible to you. Great. So with that, I'm going to jump right on into hands-on low coding. We're going to cover the distance from here to there. So the overview of where we're going is that the national address database, which I mentioned, we imported that in version 1.14. And our objective is that we're going to identify a starting point and then find all the addresses that are within some distance of that starting point. And so first, let's take a look at the national address database. Whoops, this is not where I want to be. We'll do here. And then within entities, we have the national address database. So that's an entity on campfire.plantonapp.com. If we look at the definition of it, we can see that it has things like the address number, the street address, a whole lot of fields that come from the national address database. Of course, it's a government database, and so it's very standardized and it covers all of the different circumstances that addressing can have throughout the United States. So a lot of information that we won't use, but the ones that we really cared about was latitude and longitude, as well as, of course, the core address. There's a GUID, a unique ID, and so that could be useful to uniquely identify that address. So these are the kinds of things that are in the data. If we take a look at, we can go to the page, and I'm going to go to that page in a new tab. It has, I've loaded in a lot of addresses, but really I've focused in on my home county just to give us a reasonable number of records to work with. If I sort these by ID, there's 72,000 or so of them. And so it's a good representative set. If you, again, if you watch that prior episode, you'll see how we imported them. It was a pretty straightforward procedure. We got it all done in 45 minutes or so, so not too hard to do. We have filtering built in here, the ability to search built in. And so, for example, if we were to look at the filtering for street address, we can bring up, I live on St. Orland Way, and so we can see just the houses that are, or just the addresses that are on St. Orland Way. We scroll over, we can see latitude and longitude in these GUIDs. So this is the information that we have to work with. So that's our starting point, the national address database. And our objective, we're going to make a form that is going to let you pick out a starting spot, let you pick out a radius, and then get the addresses that are nearby. So these are the steps that we're going to cover today. There's a function, a magic SQL function that I've published and you'll be able to use. It's called miles between points. It accepts a couple of latitude and longitude and tells you the distance. We will install that and then demonstrate that it works, make sure that we're working, and then we'll go on to build a form that lets you pick a point and count up the number of addresses that are nearby. And we're going to populate that using a listing. You'll be able to pick out an address from a listing and count the number of nearby addresses. So this represents where we're going today. Let's start with installing the miles between points function. So on Campfire, we have this beginning of a contribution that is the longitude, latitude, distance search. And so any of you familiar with Campfire will be able to find it there. I have a button here that the function is hidden, but you can just click the button and find it. And so this is going to create a function in SQL Server that is miles between points. And so you can simply copy the whole thing. You can take a look at it, of course, to make sure that you fully approve of what is being put into your SQL Server, but it's pretty straightforward. We'll paste it in here. It's going to, again, at the top level, it is creating a function, miles between points. It's accepting latitude and longitude, two different sets. It does some work, and at the end, it's returning distance in miles. You'll see that it's returning distance in meters as the default, and so I'm applying a little bit of math to get that in miles, so that because that's more useful to me. But this is obviously a way that you could modify the function if you wanted it to be in meters or kilometers or something. In the middle here, we have some test content that we can use to see if the thing really works. So we'll be using that in just a second. But we've pasted it. We run the query. This is going to install it. Notice it's a create function. So if you decide, if we were to run this again, you'd get an error because it can't create it again. You'd have to use alter function to be able to do that. But that's a little bit of basic SQL, transact SQL. So let's test it out. We've installed this, and I'm going to grab this particular one. It's pre-run. It should return a result of 68 miles if I've done it right. So we'll clear and paste this. We've got 2 points. Run the query, returns 68 miles. So I would say the function is working. You can give it 2 points. It'll give distance. So that's step 1 complete. We've installed the miles between points function. We've also demonstrated that it works, but now we're going to have to build up some SQL to kind of take advantage of that, right? Because we have the national address database. It has a lot of fields in here, latitude, longitude, but I am going to comment that out just so I can have it here for when we get into it in a minute. But we're going to select some information from our NAD database. We'll go ahead and select all the records, but the kind of information that we're going to want is the address number as one thing. We'll also get the street address here in a minute. And so address number, latitude, longitude from AppNAD. And just to keep it simple, I'm going to just start by saying that we want 3 records. We can kind of see what information we get. We have some street. The address number has the actual number of the address, 2101 Farm to Market, 1389 at latitude and longitude. So we've pulled some basic information, and now we want to see this function work. Well, you can use, that's why I kept it here. We want to use a little copy and paste, because we also want to use the miles between points to go from whatever this arbitrary point is, I don't know, it doesn't matter, to for this purposes, for this testing purposes, we're going to say latitude. And so we're going to take the latitude and longitude from the current address and compare it to this arbitrary point. We don't really know where it is, but what we want to do is see if it returns some miles. So this is all 76 miles away from that. So go ahead and name this column. So this is kind of our template query, how to get distance from here to there. And we've already established that. So the rest of what we're going to do is really about making this very nice and usable for end users. We have a way to go from our national address database and get a distance. I'm going to save this query as our distance template query so that in case I navigate away and lose this, I'll be able to get back to it. But this is what we're going to end up using in our form. So part one done. We've installed the function. We've demonstrated that it works and do a little bit of SQL to get ready for our form. So next thing, we're going to build a radius selection form. We're going to do this work on our latitude, longitude, distance search page. And so we're just going to start by going into edit mode and adding a form module. And we will configure this. By the way, just a random note here. Nope, I won't go there. We'll just, we won't have random notes. We're going to start a blank form. And the form is going to look something like this. We're going to need a starting spot. So a latitude and longitude from where we're starting, some radius, and then some other fields. So we'll start by putting in a text field that will be a text box that will be for latitude. And let's see, how do we want to set this up? Checking my notes here. Yeah, we'll make this, in order for this form to work, we're going to make this be required. So we'll come down here and say it's required. And then I also want this to be a positive floating point number. That's will prevent people from entering in things other than a positive floating point. And so we got a couple of validations present. Longitude is going to be similar, so I'm just going to use the clone field and change this to longitude. We're still going to validate it, but it longitude and where I am is a negative number, and I suppose there's probably places that that latitude doesn't have to be positive. So your mileage may vary. You might have to change these a little bit, these validators. But this gives us, and now we're get into little preferences here. This is going to be called the radius target form. And I happen to like my labels on top. So we'll save that and get a look at what this looks like so far. First of all, it came in as Bootstrap 3. Let's make sure that we have everything in this page set up appropriately. So the page definition needs to be Bootstrap 5. And so I've picked out something from my templates that is now Bootstrap 5. I'm using Page Builder, so that's what we get with that. And then the definition of, we'll have the definition of this form, and it is Bootstrap 5. I have another form on the page, which is this one, where we're displaying that miles between points function, and we'll set this one to Bootstrap 5 as well. So everything needs to be on Bootstrap 5, and it just didn't come in as a default, and that's why we got all those nice errors. So now we have our definition on top. This is not really helpful to what we're doing, other than it's the place where we're storing away that function when you need to set it up on your system. So we have a latitude, longitude box, and if we try to do a negative number, it's being validated out. And then longitude in the same way, you can't type alphabetics. It needs a valid floating point number. So that's good. So let's keep working. We've got the beginnings of this. We'll lay these out side by side. So side by side layout here. The next field that we want on our form is radius in miles, so that this will be an input for the user. So we'll do a field. I guess this can also be we'll make this be a number field. So it's a type text number. And the name is going to be title, radius in miles. And we'll let that be the ID as well, radius miles. From a layout standpoint, I want to see this right next to the other ones. And so let's see where we are. Great, so we're starting to get lined up a little bit. The other thing that I want to do, my initial intention is we're going to accept this latitude, longitude, and the radius that we're going to do. And then perhaps we're going to count up and display how many addresses are in that. The idea is that we're going to do like a count and then figure out if that count is, if it's too high or too low, we might change the radius so that we can see. If we're targeting getting 100 houses, we could go up or down with the radius to try and zero in on our number. So that's the idea. We want to display how many are on there. So we'll go back and add a count field or a number of addresses field. So that is also going to be a text box. And it'll be the number of addresses text box. And this is I think that's all we need there. And then let's take a look. Because it's kind of a pain to type in the let's clean this up. Layout isn't right. We want this perhaps over here, something like this. Great. So because it's kind of a pain to type in latitude, longitude and be a copy paste, what we're actually going to do is to build a nice listing and just be able to click on the listing and populate this automatically. But it's going to actually pick out an address. So I'm going to also display this address on the form just so that for user convenience, what does this look like? So we'll have one more field. Going to be a text field. It's going to be called address. And yep, that's it. And layout wise, it's going to appear underneath these other things. And we'll stub out the rest of what we're going to do. We'll do a count button. We don't have any logic for this yet, but we'll do it in a minute. This count button, I'm going to make it appear as it's normal size, but as a link. And we'll put it in the center. And from a layout standpoint, I want the count button to be right between these. So when we look at it now, we'll have a count button. So the idea is we'll get an address, type in the number, the distance, hit count, and we'll get the number of addresses appearing there. But before we do that, let's figure out how to populate latitude and longitude. So to do that, we're going to do a listing over here to the right. There's 10 different ways to do this, and I'm just picking one. So if you don't like this way, you could do it another way, a pop-up, for example, or something else. But we'll put a listing here and configure it to get its data from the National Address Database, and nothing more than that. We'll save. The information that we want to display on this listing is the address number and the street address. And so we'll add those fields to it. And this is it's already configured as sortable and searchable, so we'll be able to find a particular address quite easily. And so let's go that far. If we, and then we'll call this the address listing. Always good to name your rules. So now we have an address listing showing up over here to the right. I'm going to close out of edit mode just so this little black box will hide. So if I wanted to look up my address, we see it here, and so we can if we build a button, we can click on it and have it populate latitude, longitude over here, and that's what we're going to do next. Build that button. So in our, let's see, we need to edit the address listing. This is why you name them, so you can find them on the list. The address listing is going to have, I'm going to look at data table options. I want my buttons to be on the left for convenience sake, so I'm going to move them over on the left. And then we'll add a button, and the button is going to be something along the lines of select starting address. But I'm not even going to have a title. I'm just going to put it as an ID. So I'm not using a title because I just want to choose an icon. So from a style standpoint, I'm going to make it be the primary color, and I'm going to pick out a font os and pick out an icon that I like. And I think there's some in here that are about mapping. So for example, a map marker might be a good icon to use. And so we'll pick that. And so this is going to give us a button. I know I'm single stepping through this, but just it's helpful for new people to see. So we have a button. It doesn't do anything yet, but it appears on the left. So now when we click this, we want it to populate this stuff, and so that's what we're going to do next. Let's see, that's the form. Sorry for clicking around. So we go back to our address listing, we go to our buttons, and we're going to configure the actions. What is this button going to do when you click on it? And it's really a pretty simple action that we want to use. It's going to be the initialize form and stop execution. It's just going to set up that other form with some information. So the other form that's going to impact is the radius target form. And it's going to do a few things. First of all, we want it to populate the latitude is going to be the latitude of this row, or whatever was clicked. In the same way, longitude is going to be the longitude of the record that we're clicking. And the final one we're going to pass along the address. And this one is a little more interesting. We want to get we have these two rows here, address number and street number. We want to build them, and address number, street address. We want to build them up together as what we're passing. So we'll do that. Space. So this is going to pass it in the URL for that form and then initialize the form. So we're going to have to do something to consume that, but we'll save it and go this far. So now when we click, it's doing something, but it doesn't actually impact our form. That's because we have to consume that. It's passing that as on the URL, and so we'll set up to consume that. So the latitude, we're going to change the initial value of latitude to get latitude. That pulls information off of the query string, and so it's going to do that for us. We'll go down to longitude and do essentially the same thing, except instead of latitude, we're going to say longitude. And then finally, on our address, we're going to get the address as the initial value. That's the parameters that we're passing from that listing. So now this is going to hopefully initialize our form. So we'll refresh. We'll pick one at random here, 875 House South Highway. So we get a latitude and a longitude. It populates the form for us automatically, and it's just kind of instantaneous. Very nice. All right, and then we'll get to the end of the cosmetics here for a second. This radius is coming in with nothing in it. We set our initial target to say that we wanted to do 1 mile. So we'll put a 1.0 here in the initial value, and that way when this form comes up, it's going to come up with that ready to go. So all you have to do is pick out an address point. Got 1 mile set, and we hit count. Good to go. All right, all that was a little bit cosmetic, but now at least we have a latitude and a longitude that we can work from and use that to come up with the number of addresses. So we just need, again, a little bit of SQL to make that happen. And let's see if we can come up with that. So it's going to be something similar to this, and so I'm going to copy that. We'll do a little bit of work in here to get that to happen. So we're going to our button, the count button, and we're going to run some SQL. And so on the click, we'll connect a SQL, a run SQL action. And so this SQL, you know, again, pasting that query, it's based on this, but we need to do some work. We want to compare we're going to select, and what we're really going to do is select, instead of all this information that's coming back, we just want a count of something. And so instead of all that, we're going to get the count of the GUID. That was the name of the field that was present in as a unique identifier. So we'll get a count of those. And so we're going to get the count of that, and then we're not going to need all of that, but it's, I'm going to save that aside again to work with in a second. So we're going to get the count of GUID from the table where the miles between points is something. Well, we're going to use latitude and longitude, whatever the latitude and longitude of the individual records are, but we want, instead of comparing it to these constants, we want to compare it to the information on our form. So we're going to use the latitude field, which again, the ID actually comes from this. We can copy the ID if we want to. So for longitude, we're going to set a longitude value and a latitude value, and we're going to pass these in as SQL parameters. So just to kind of cover what's happening, before the SQL query runs, we're setting up two variables that are going to be passed in, the latitude variable and the longitude variable, and we're filling them in with values from our form. These are all kind of named the same, so it might not be completely evident, but this is the field value from our form being passed in as latitude, field value from our form being passed in as longitude. The output from this is actually, we can just put it directly onto the form. We want it to go to this number of addresses field. So I'll copy that field ID and store it there. It's returning a count of something, so that number is going to go to our number of addresses field. The last thing that we need to do is add the update form Ajax, which says the form is going to get updated and we're not going to clear the screen. It's just going to, so essentially it's saying now that this is on the form, display the form. Cool. So we refresh here and now we pick some, we want to pick our good starting point, an actual house number. So we can pick it here. And so we have a latitude, a longitude, my actual address showing up. We want 1 mile away. We click count and we get an error.
I think your where clause is not complete there. I think.
So we'll, it wouldn't be any good at all if we didn't have an error to fix. SQL query. Yeah, I had this left over here as distance in miles. We don't need that. So where clause. Oh, and you're right. It's not where clause. Absolutely, it's not full. We wanted to say less than or equal to the radius information, right? So let's call this the radius miles. I'm just going to say less than, less than whatever the radius miles is, and then we need to pass in the radius miles identifier field value. So yeah, we didn't wire it up at all. That was ugly. So we try again. Pick a starting spot, hit count. So there's 774 addresses near my house. I happen to have run this in the past as we want. Ask for integer number. That's something we can clean up. I want to be able to do fractional numbers for the radius. So in our validation, instead of saying integer number, we'll just say this can be a floating point number. So I want to say 0. So a quarter mile, I've previously done the count, it should come up to 80. So if we do that, that's right. Good. All right. So now we, with just varying this number, we can come up with the number we want. Curiosity, how many are within 5 miles of our house? A lot. Okay. So that's gotten the basic objective, right? We're going back to what we said we were going to do. We built a radius selection form. We're populating the starting point by an address listing, and we end up with a count of the number of nearby addresses. So where would we go next with this application? We really, all we've done is counted them up. But if we had probably the next logical step is that if you're going to do something with these addresses, whether it's mail to them or physically visit them or map them out, you'd want to build up a table that would have the address list of the qualifying addresses. Another thing that you might want to do is to map that. And I would encourage, we're not going to have time to actually get a map done, I don't think, but I encourage you to take a look at episode number 81, that Low-Code Cafe 81, that Jerry Maddox helped us and showed us how to do dynamic Google mapping, a very short number of steps. Within an hour or so, you'd be able to map all these out against a Google map. You need some credentials with Google and stuff like that, but it's pretty straightforward. And as I mentioned earlier, for people outside, people who want other units, let's say, If you wanted to use kilometers or meters or something like that, you might tinker with that function to return some different stuff. The actual SQL that's before you do conversions, it's returning meters, so you can use apply any conversion factors that you might want to use. If there are no questions, and I'd be happy to take questions. If there's no questions, I'm going to go on to just building an address list using that the addresses that qualify. That's a pretty straightforward thing to get done. So we have our, let's say that we're going to actually build a separate simple table that's going to accept our addresses. So perhaps we'll create a new entity. It's going to need things. Once an address is selected out of the national address list, really all it needs is the GUID, because you'll be able to, you could join from the table that we're building, but just for kind of simplicity, we'll create this, instead of joining to it, we'll, let's do it right. We'll just join to it. So we will create an entity that holds only our GUID. So this will be a new item. It's going to be address. Let's put it under the same place. So the latitude, put it under to distance search as a place to live. It's going to have characteristics of GUID, which would be the map GUID. And I am going to put address here as a visual indication of what that is. And we'll make address be the drill down property. So we'll save that. So we get an address table. And we can go ahead and drill into it so we can take a look at it when it gets populated. So we have no data, but it's going to just accept a GUID and an address. Very straightforward. So back to this form, we're going to, in addition to have a count, we're going to say add to selected as a choice. So we'll create a button. So when they click it, this is going to be a normal button that is in our primary color. And what are the actions going to be? Well, we want to use the same kind of selection, the same where clause from the other button, and insert those into the other table. So we will let's grab that where clause just so that we don't have to invent it. We'll have to work on it a little bit because we got to substitute in those values, but that's the, let's take all of it. We're going to add a SQL. This is going to be a create list from SQL so we can iterate through it and do things with it. So the SQL is going to look something like this, but instead of pulling the count of GUID, we want the GUID. No, we only want the GUID and the address, which is the combination of and I'm going to test this out before we get too far so I don't get in trouble. So in SQL console, we'll test this out and just get the records. This is why we test. yeah, so we've got this is what we want to return. So where were we working? So we're going to get two things back, the GUID and the address, and we're going to call that as address. So that'll be the field name. The list that we're creating is the selected list, and I'm going to copy that because we're going to need it in a minute. So this SQL is going to run, and it's going to give us a list of things back. We need to bind into our variables in the same way. Little low code copy and paste stuff going on here. It's all wired in the same way. And so that's, instead of returning a count, it's going to return the addresses. And so now we have the selected list. We want to spin through that selected list. So we're going to say execute on for each list entry. The list that we want to go through is the selected list. And now these actions will be done once for every item that's in the selected list. So what we want to do is to create new selected I don't think I've saved this since I added that new table. So I'm going to save it and refresh so that because it didn't know about my table. Great. So we'll continue on building this add to selected address choice. The actions we want to do is create a new selected address. Now we just fill in the blanks. Well, we're going to need the selected list GUID and the selected list address. These are the fields that were created in our create list. We had GUID and address created. And so for each one of those, we're going to create a record. We're not going to do anything with the output token, so we won't do it. So we'll save this. So now we save, refresh. We'll test it out. We know we had our 0.25 miles. We had a count of 80. So if we use our add to selected and it works, we should get 80 addresses in our selected address listing. And there they are. Good. And so there, from here, you could use this to go on to mapping and things like that, joining from this to the selected table. Good. I think if there are no questions, I think we've kind of illustrated the point, how to get from point to point. This is now present as a contribution in low-code Campfire. And so I'll just, for example, mention, go to to the campfireplantandapp.com, this latitude, longitude, distance search. If you go there, it has this example form that we did. You can pick addresses and see exactly how it works. You can see the function that you need to install on your system in order to make it work. So it's a fully reusable thing if you're part of our Campfire group. Great. Sir.
Yeah, something else I was just going to add in is that you could also, on the put a button here that would do an export of the addresses too, just as an idea. In case
that would be a good expansion. I think, again, if we think about there's some shortcomings in this too. The good thing, for example, is that you could do a radius from one point, and then maybe you want to pick a different neighborhood and do and add those selected. We'd need the ability to clear out the selected addresses. Perhaps you do a verification to make sure you don't add the same address twice. So there's definitely room to improve, and then adding that map on that we talked about. So lots of things that we can do to make it better, but giving you the tools, not necessarily building the final solution. And for those interested, I'm actually using this to do a thing with my church, and so we're visiting. We want to be able to visit addresses, and perhaps there'll be a follow-up. One of the next steps that I'm going to do in that application is to be able to map the addresses, but then also map an efficient route through the addresses. If you were going to send people to actually knock on doors, you might assign 20 houses, and you'd want them to all to be nearby, and so using that proximity information is kind of my next step. So it's an interesting little problem. We thank you for joining us today in the Low Code Cafe. Hope you picked up something of use. Use the feedback form and let us know. And if you want to see something else or different, or have other ideas. Otherwise, please, again, join us on Low Code Campfire on Friday. Thanks for attending. See you next time.